I am Annika Holopanoffer, and I am from Washington, United States of America. My project is on the analysis of COVID-19 misinformation, looking into its fake origin and cure narratives. There have been nearly 3.2 million deaths from COVID-19, many of which have not only been affected by the biology of the virus, but also about misinformation that is being spread about this virus. I wanted to understand how human behavior plays a part in any pandemic, but also when dealing with misinformation in general. I hypothesized that as humans, we are susceptible to misinformation, but are also likely to be more believing if it comes from a trustworthy source. To put my hypothesis to the test, I created a short fake article on sharks in a river close to our home and sent it to around 20 of my friends. 19 out of 20 of my friends believed the article immediately and never doubted its credibility or who wrote it and what kind of website it was on. And this kickstarted my project. If just such a small group of my friends believed just a little fake article that I created, with a worldwide pandemic going on, what kind of misinformation is being spread and how is that influencing people's behavior? And what made my project unique was that I looked into specifically social media analytics and graph analytics and tied them together to study COVID-19 related narrative topics. I had different focuses in my studies, such as the dynamics over time, social interactions between the different unique users, the data collection, along with recommendations I based off insights from my data. My data is formatted as posts and comments. So I went onto Reddit, which is a social media platform, to find my data. So I'm using a Python script that was created in the Social Sim, which is a social media analytics tool. I was able to input keywords for my Reddit search. For example, in the Bill Gates narrative, I used keywords such as Bill Gates created, was the origin, caused, and COVID-19 to only find the posts and comments that were relating to misinformation that Bill Gates caused COVID-19. I did this and was able to find the different metrics for each narrative, like the shares and speed, and also the Gini and Palma index, which just represented the inequality in the unique users population. Basically, I was seeing the top 10%, who were the active users that were doing the most posting and commenting, versus the bottom 40%, which were the silent users that weren't engaging much in the conversation but were still participating. I then looked into different key graph analytics, which I'll talk more in my presentation. So now looking into the dynamics or unique user over time. So we can see with Fauci, which has a speed of 87 shares per day, and then Bioweapon, which has a speed of only 2 shares per day. So Fauci is one of the larger narratives with a lot more users than compared to Bioweapon, which only has around 422 users. And we can differentiate between how these big narratives, how much they're spreading versus the smaller narratives like Bioweapon. And same thing for the different cures, such as hydroxychloroquine, which is a much bigger narrative than compared to silver. They also have different numbers of shares per day depending on the number of unique users that are actively engaging in conversations. And we can see in the PALMA score, which represents the number of unique users which initialize the conversations versus the number of unique users which just participate. So this is kind of like those people that make the first post versus the people that just comment or share that post. And we can see with 5G, which makes it kind of unique, is that it has the same ratio of the users that are participating and initializing these conversations. So then looking into the number of unique users over time, which kind of looked into the spikes and recurrence. For example, example, as we can see with Fauci, there are multiple spikes over a period of time, but versus Silver and Gates, which there is just one giant spike, and then it really dies down, or at least severely drops. This kind of led me to wonder what causes these spikes and why are unique users so engaged at that point only. So I went on to mainstream media to help answer that question. And I could see with 5G that around the time of its biggest spike, back in April of 2020, there was cell phone towers being burned and a lot of mayhem happening in the UK around that time. And this is just one example of when misinformation got severely out of hand, that not only was property being destroyed, but workers were also being harassed and losing their jobs. And is it the same thing with cures? So Silver, which had that one spike, which made it really fascinating, was that Jim Baker, an online TV preacher, came out with a silver solution that supposedly was going to cure COVID. Obviously, it was a hoax, and he was quickly debunked by sources online and also sued by the state of Missouri. That's why the spread of misinformation for this narrative nearly completely died down once he was debunked, versus hydroxychloroquine, which is a little bit more difficult to tackle. As you can see, there were multiple spikes over time, and even if it was being debunked over and over again, had a trickier time completely dying down because of the credibility behind it. It was backed up by the government and other doctors, whereas Silver didn't have much credibility to begin with. So now I look into the graph analytics portion of my project. So basically, with graph analytics, I'm trying to understand these different users in what connections they have with each other and what communities that they form. I'm very simply trying to see all these unique users are posting and commenting off of each other. So when a unique user makes a post, and other unique users come and comment off of that post, they're building a network, and then so on and so forth, and eventually they build this entire community of unique users that are engaging with each other, participating in conversations, posting and commenting, and just talking to each other and building that big group. So then with that, I was trying to just build this graph, and as you can see, some of the key graph statistics kind of showed that basically I was seeing the factors and edges, which were like the unique users, and then the edges represented the connections they formed with each other. And then modularity, which just symbolized how good a community structure was. So then a high modularity score indicated a really good community and a strong set of users that were just actively engaging with each other, versus a low modularity score just indicated a weaker community and not as much interaction between users. So now we get to the fun part. We can see all the different graphs that I created on Gephi. So in Silver, it's not as obvious, but there's actually one singular user that made the first post, which gathered a lot of comments off of that post, which built this giant community. And users from that community ventured off and joined other communities, kind of entangling and creating so much misinformation that was being spread. As you can see in the Fauci narrative, there is a lot of misinformation that is being spread since the communities and users are much larger in scale. And we must find ways to tackle and take down these big communities and those singular users in order to stop the spread of misinformation. To tie everything together, I came up with a set of recommendations based on the insights from the dynamic over time along with graph analytics portions of my project. My biggest key point here is media literacy. We have to find ways to educate people in our society to differentiate between what is fake and real news. This is also a call to action to our government and social media platforms to create ways to limit the number of shares and comments of posts that are actively spreading misinformation to make aware of people that are spreading what they are actually spreading and to find ways to reduce the number of spikes and recurrence in the data. We have to find ways to make facts go viral instead of misinformation. In order to save the world, we have to stop the spread of misinformation. Thank you.